You know the friend who can't leave a text unread for more than a few minutes, the one who has to answer it right now, mid-meeting, mid-dinner, doesn't matter. You also know the other kind, the one who can let a message sit for a day without it costing them any sleep. Psychology has spent half a century insisting the difference between those two people is willpower, and it built that claim on a plate of marshmallows and a 4-year-old. The story you've probably heard goes like this. In the late 1960s, psychologist Walter Mischel sat preschoolers down at Stanford with one marshmallow in front of them. He told them if they could wait alone in the room without eating it, they'd get 2. Some children caved in seconds, others stared it down for the full quarter hour. Years later, when Mischel's team followed up with those same kids as teenagers, the ones who'd waited longer scored higher on their college entrance exams and seemed to be coping better with life in general. The conclusion the culture ran with was simple and seductive. Willpower in a 4-year-old predicts the adult they'll become. That single finding did enormous work in the decades that followed. It showed up in parenting books telling you how to raise a more disciplined child. It showed up in bestsellers about grit, in corporate workshops about employee performance, in think pieces explaining poverty as a failure of self-management rather than a shortage of money. A 4-year-old's quarter hour with a marshmallow had quietly become a stand-in for character itself, evidence that success was mostly a matter of what you were willing to endure. Here's what usually gets left out of that story. The famous follow-up wasn't built on hundreds of children. The sharpest numbers, the SAT correlations everyone quotes, came from fewer than 100 kids, and those kids weren't a cross-section of anywhere. The study ran at a nursery school on Stanford's own campus, one that gave enrollment priority to Stanford faculty, staff, and graduate students. That's the kind of household where a marshmallow was never the difference between a full pantry and an empty one. Mischel himself described that group as bright almost beyond any normal scale, and he warned in his own writing that the sample was too small to lean on hard. That warning got lost somewhere between the journal and the TED Talks. In 2018, a team led by psychologists Tyler Watts, Greg Duncan, and Haonan Kwon finally ran the test on a group of children who actually looked like the country, not just a small, comfortable slice of it. A large share came from families where the mother hadn't finished college and many were living close to or below the poverty line. When the researchers accounted for the family's income, the parents' education, and the stability of the home, the original link between waiting longer at 4 and doing better at 15 shrank by 2/3. Most of whatever was left came down to something far less dramatic than the popular story suggests, simply being able to wait at all for as little as 20 seconds. Holding out any longer than that barely mattered, and when researchers isolated self-control on its own, apart from everything else about a child's background, it explained only about a quarter of that smaller effect. Willpower was in there somewhere. It just wasn't doing most of the work. So if it wasn't willpower doing the work, what was it? A study out of the University of Colorado Boulder gives a clue. Researchers had preschoolers watch an adult accidentally damage someone else's belongings, then either admit it honestly or lie about it. That same adult then ran the marshmallow task with the child. Kids who had just watched the adult tell the truth mostly waited it out all the way to the 15-minute cutoff. Kids who had just watched the same adult lie gave up in under 5 minutes on average. Waiting, it turns out, is a bet on the person making the promise. Children are quietly calculating the odds, based on what their own world has already taught them about whether the people around them followed through. That reframes the whole test. A child who grabs the marshmallow immediately isn't failing a character exam. They may be running the numbers correctly based on a life where promises don't always arrive on schedule, where the pantry empties before payday, where waiting has cost them before. A stable, resourced household teaches a child that later is safe to bet on. An unstable one teaches the opposite lesson, and it teaches it accurately. This matters beyond one experiment because the marshmallow test became shorthand for something much bigger. It became the idea that success comes down to individual grit, and that people who struggle financially simply lack the discipline richer people have in greater supply. That idea is comforting if you're the one who did well, because it means you earned every bit of it alone. It gets a lot less comforting once you learn that the test measuring that grit was, for the most part, measuring the bank balance and the routine sitting underneath it. It also changes a very ordinary habit most of us have, which is judging someone else's patience or our own as a verdict on their worth. The colleague who can't sit through a slow quarter without panicking, the friend who can't hold on to savings even when they mean to, might not be missing a virtue you happen to have. They might be running the same rational calculation that 4-year-old was running, just with different numbers behind it. None of this means self-control isn't real, or that it doesn't shape how your life goes, but the next time you catch yourself feeling proud of your own patience, or quietly judging someone else's, including that friend who can't leave a text alone for 5 minutes, notice how much you want the willpower story to be true. It lets you take full credit for wherever you've ended up. That want is the real thing a marshmallow test leaves behind after all these years, not a measurement of anyone's discipline, but a mirror for what you'd rather believe about yourself. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this video gave you something to think about, do one small thing. Subscribe to Cool My Mind Psychology. Every video here unpacks the hidden psychology behind how we think, feel, and act, and subscribing is how you'll never miss the next one. Take care of your mind, and I will see you in the next video.